Most horror stories begin with a scream. This one begins with silence. In the spring of 1982, a woman named Fiona Croy wandered barefoot down the old rural road into Ashfern, England, blood dried along her feet and the hem of her nightdress torn to ribbons. She was 16, missing for over 4 months, and mute. Not a word, not a sound, no scream. She simply stopped at the town square's war monument and sat at its base, as if she had been waiting for the town to find her. And though Fiona's lips never moved again in her lifetime, the story she brought with her, silent and incomplete, would begin the slow, painful unraveling of one of the most disturbing child care institutions ever registered under the English welfare system. Ashfern lies tucked away near the Lincolnshire Wolds, an unassuming village with limestone cottages, a modest population of fewer than 1,000, and a post-war hush that settled over its fields and never left. Time moved slower in Ashfern, and many liked it that way. Its people lived and died in the same homes, under the same weathered steeple, with the same names repeating down the school registers. It was the kind of place where change was not welcomed. But in 1969, change came anyway, when 2 sisters, Judith and Martha Elwood, arrived from Leicester with intentions that no one questioned at first. They were peculiar, yes, unmarried, in their mid-40s, and always dressed in dull grays and navy blues that made them appear older than they were. They bought the old Tamsley Manor on the edge of the woods, a great stone-gutted estate that had sat derelict since the war, and registered it as a private care facility for girls. They called it the Quiet Home. At first, there were only 3 children taken in, orphans from inner-city Leicester. A few months later, 2 more arrived, then 4. By 1975, the Quiet Home housed nearly 20 girls, all between the ages of 6 and 15. According to council records, the home was inspected biannually and always marked as satisfactory, though interviews with former social workers years later would reveal that they were often denied access to the full premises, and no interviews with the girls were ever conducted without Judith or Martha present. Mrs. Ellen Trask, who ran the local bakery in the 70s, remembered the girls coming into town only rarely. They never spoke, she said in a 2003 interview. All of them, quiet as stone. They walked in twos, never more, hands clasped, eyes to the floor. It was eerie, but we thought maybe that was just the way they were taught. Others in town echoed the sentiment. Something had always felt off, but nothing specific enough to act on. The girls never screamed. They never cried. They never ran. Until Fiona Croy came back. According to police records obtained under the Freedom of Information Act in 2011, Fiona had been reported missing from a Leicester foster home in November of 1981. The note in her file read, potential runaway, history of behavioral silence, no known relatives, last seen near boarding platform. It wasn't until after her reappearance in Ashfern that her connection to the Quiet Home was confirmed. She had been the latest addition, arriving in late December. The timeline suggested she had been at the home less than 5 months. Ashfern's local police, unused to serious criminal matters, deferred the case to the Lincolnshire Constabulary's Special Crimes Division. Investigators approached Tamsley Manor on April 18, 1982, and were met at the Iron Gate by Martha Elwood. Detective Alan Paris, who led the first official inquiry, later described the encounter in his internal report. Martha was calm. Not surprised, not nervous, just still. She said the girl must have run away, that she'd never heard of anyone named Fiona, and that the home had not accepted new placements in months. When pressed, Martha provided a list of current residents, 17 girls, all supposedly accounted for. It was a lie. Paris and his team were not granted access to the full premises, and without a formal warrant or immediate evidence of wrongdoing, they had to leave. The home was registered. The sisters were known. Fiona's silence could not speak for itself. For a month, nothing more happened, but behind closed doors, pressure was building. Fiona was placed in the care of a psychiatric facility in Gainsborough. There she refused to eat for days, then weeks. When she was given paper and pen, she scribbled violently, tearing through the pages with ink, but never forming a legible word. One note, however, was saved. It was a single phrase written over and over in shaking, ink-streaked letters they only whisper when it's dark. By May of 1982, 2 other girls were reported missing from the Leicester care system. Marion Blight, age 13, and Daisy Whitlock, age 9. Neither had families. Both were listed as transferred to private home care. The address, Tamsley Manor. This time, the warrant was issued. On the morning of May 27, police raided the Quiet Home. What they found behind the gates of the old manor sent shockwaves through not just Ashfern, but the entire nation. The property was massive, larger than most realized, and heavily fortified inside. Most of the windows had been boarded over from the inside, not for repair, but for containment. The rooms were nearly soundproof, with layers of cotton and wooden panels nailed to the walls. The girls' rooms were small and uniform, no books, no toys. Each room had a single bed, a chamber pot, and an old-fashioned writing desk, always bare. Their clothes, gray cotton uniforms, were kept in bins outside the rooms. There were no personal items allowed. When asked to speak, the girls did not respond. Not in English, not in any known language. Dr. Alice Hindman, a linguist who consulted on the case in the early days, would later say in her testimony, it wasn't just muteness, it was something deeper. They communicated, but only in pairs, a kind of mirrored babble, like invented tongues. But they only used it when alone or unobserved. When watched, they were silent. The official report counted 19 girls on site, 2 more than the Elwoods had claimed. Of those 19, 3 were found in a hidden chamber beneath the east wing. The room was not on any blueprints and had been sealed behind a false pantry wall. Inside were the remains of 2 young girls, one identified as Daisy Whitlock through dental records, the other never confirmed. The third girl found alive was Marion Blight. She was restrained, dehydrated, and had not spoken in weeks. Photographs of the chamber later classified depicted a room covered in torn pages, not from books, but from what appeared to be handwritten journals, hundreds of them, filled with nonsensical symbols, stick drawings, and phrases repeated ad nauseum. Quiet things live in the air. Close your eyes or they come. They don't like the sound of teeth. And over again, they only whisper when it's dark. Judith and Martha Elwood were arrested that same day without resistance. They did not ask for lawyers. They did not deny the existence of the secret chamber. They did not cry. In separate interrogations, the sisters answered every question with a single response. We made them quiet. When pressed to explain further, they each said the same thing. The world is too loud. They needed peace. Martha added one chilling sentence during her final interview before being declared unfit for trial. We weren't the first. We only continued the work. That phrase would come back years later, haunting the investigators who thought the case had been closed. The trial of Judith Elwood began in September 1983 and lasted only 6 weeks. She was charged with involuntary manslaughter, unlawful imprisonment, neglect, and psychological abuse of minors. With Martha ruled mentally incompetent, all legal responsibility fell to Judith, who pleaded not guilty by reason of spiritual duty. She was sentenced to life in a secure psychiatric hospital. The quiet home was shut down. The children dispersed across the UK in new placements. Many were never seen again in public records. Some changed names. Others were lost in the system. But the silence never ended. Because just when the public thought it was over, another girl came back. And this time she could speak. She remembered everything. And what she revealed would change everything we thought we knew about the Elwood sisters and about the real purpose of the quiet home. Her name was Clarissa Mead. In 1991, nearly a decade after the quiet home was shut down, Clarissa appeared at a social worker's office in Eastbourne under a new identity. She had lived through 3 foster homes since the closure of the home. She was 21 years old when she came forward, unprompted, and said she had something to confess, not about herself, but about what had been done to her, and to others. She had been one of the 19 girls found at Tamsley Manor. Clarissa was different from the others. She had learned to speak again. Not fluently, not easily, but enough to put words to the things most others had buried. It was never about being quiet, she said in her recorded testimony. It was about being still. Inside, they said noise made it easier for them to get in. Her account led to the reopening of the investigation in early 1992, not as a criminal trial. Judith remained confined, and Martha had died in the hospital in 1988, but as a formal inquiry into systemic failure and deeper possibilities of ritual abuse, cover-up, and lost children. Clarissa spoke of the ritual of the second silence. That phrase had never appeared in any police report, not in any written documents from the Elwoods, not even in the journals recovered from the hidden chamber. But she said it was real, a practice, something done in secret late at night with candles and a book without words. We were taught the first silence with pain, she said. They slapped our mouths when we made noise. But the second silence, that was different. That's when they said we belonged to the whisperers. Investigators at the time dismissed this language as delusional or as a byproduct of trauma. But when forensic analyst Peter Wingate revisited the original evidence boxes, he made a disturbing discovery. One of the journals, originally catalogued as incoherent, contained a diagram. It had been hand-drawn in graphite, and though crude, it showed a repeated symbol, a mouth with 2 vertical slashes through it. Around the image were notes in childish handwriting. They come through the walls if you hum. Don't draw the door. Don't look at it. Speak and you bring it. Wingate Cross referenced this imagery with folklore and local myths and unearthed something that no one had considered before. The Elwoods may have believed in what they were doing. In 1931, a series of strange disappearances occurred in the same region, Lincolnshire, long before the Elwood sisters ever arrived in Ashfern. 4 girls vanished from a convent-run orphanage just 20 miles south of where Tamsley Manor stood. The case was cold, unsolved, but local newspaper clippings from the time mentioned an odd detail: girls known for their silence. No alarm raised, all presumed runaway. Teachers noted strange behavior in the weeks prior. The name of the convent, St. Edda's, long defunct. But it had one unusual feature. Its chapel bore a unique carving above its arch, an image of a shrouded face with 2 fingers over its mouth. Records showed that both Judith and Martha Elwood had attended St. Eda's until its closure in 1942 following a fire. They had been raised there. Clarissa Mead's testimony took on a new weight. It wasn't just the Elwoods' twisted invention. It was learned, taught, repeated. They made us sit in the chapel room, Clarissa said, every Sunday. No prayers, just silence. Sometimes for hours you couldn't cough, couldn't scratch, couldn't even breathe loud. If you did, they'd take you downstairs. She hesitated when asked what was downstairs. They called it the listening room, she finally said. But I only saw it once. There were chairs in a circle, no windows, 1 candle, and something on the wall, like a cloth, but not. It moved, even when there was no wind. Multiple interviewers reported Clarissa going into dissociative episodes when asked further questions. The inquiry halted contact with her after she attempted to harm herself in July of that year. But the term, listening room, triggered a new line of inquiry. Among the confiscated evidence from 1982 was a framed picture that had been overlooked in storage, faded, water damaged. But when enhanced by forensics, it showed 7 young girls, maybe aged 10 or 11, seated in a bare stone room. No windows, no decor. All of them were facing away from the camera toward a far wall. On that wall was a large black sheet or tapestry, partially obscured by a glare, but a faint symbol could be seen in its upper corner. The same double, slashed mouth. The media latched onto the story once more. Articles resurfaced. Old townspeople were interviewed. But many had moved away, some had died, and others wanted nothing to do with it, except one. Gerald Pike had worked as a groundskeeper for the estate adjacent to Tamsley Manor in the 1970s. He came forward to Channel 5's documentary unit in 1993 with a short, chilling statement. I used to hear singing. Very late but wrong. Off, like it was being hummed through teeth, not in joy, in warning. Pike claimed he once wandered near the boundary of the Elwood property and saw something he never reported: girls standing perfectly still in a clearing, 11 of them, in a circle, not moving, not blinking. And Judith Elwood, seated in a wooden chair in the center, eyes closed, lips moving. No sound, none at all, just wind, and her lips moving like she was praying. I turned around and walked away, never went back. He wasn't believed at the time, but when his testimony was presented to Clarissa during a final evaluation in 1994, she broke down crying. It was the only time she showed unprompted emotion during all her sessions. He saw it, she whispered. It was real. It was real. Well, the public wanted answers. Parliament was petitioned. A review of private children's homes in the 1970s and 80s began in earnest. But the damage had already been done. Out of the 19 girls recovered from the quiet home, only 6 remained traceable by the time of the inquiry. 2 had died by suicide in their 20s. 3 had criminal records with noted psychiatric issues. None had successfully reintegrated into long-term placements or education. Clarissa herself disappeared in 1996. A letter was found in her final residence. It was unsigned, dated only by hand, and written in all caps. Celia and CPU Light ITDE. In 2002, a final sweep of Tamsley Manor, then a ruin scheduled for demolition, uncovered a locked wooden chest buried beneath the stone floor of what had once been the laundry room. Inside were 17 cloth dolls, each hand stitched with buttons for eyes, and mouths sewn shut with thick black thread. Each doll had a name stitched into its hem. 14 of those names matched the original known residents. 3 were unknown. One of the names, Woven, matched the missing girl never identified among the recovered bodies. The dolls were taken into evidence and sealed. The house was demolished in 2003, but the soil remained unsettled, because long after the last wall came down, locals reported strange things: children waking at night with nosebleeds, dogs barking at corners, and always, an unnatural quiet where the house once stood, as if sound avoided it, as if something still listened. In the years following the demolition of Tamsley Manor, Ashfern tried to forget. The quiet home was never mentioned in school curriculums. No plaque was raised. Local tour guides skipped that stretch of road entirely. The land sat vacant for nearly a decade, fenced off and overgrown, with real estate offers quietly withdrawn whenever buyers visited the site. It became known in the faintest of local whispers as the listening field, but memory has a way of growing roots in silence. In 2009, nearly 30 years after the original investigation, a graduate student named Rebecca Mearns reignited public interest in the case through an academic thesis submitted to the University of Exeter. The paper was titled Echoes of Silenced Child Institutional Trauma and the Persistence of Invented Language. Her research focused on how trauma survivors, particularly children, develop cryptophagia or twin speech to process pain. Most of her work drew on known studies, but the final chapter referenced an unverified case file, the Ashfern cohort. What caught the attention of researchers wasn't the content, it was the fact that she had access to language samples that had never been made public. One of her footnotes cited Group Audio Tueu 1981, Session 3, Nighttime Recital. There was no record of this in the National Archives. When pressured, Mearns admitted that the recordings had been given to her by her maternal uncle, now deceased, who had worked for a private third-party contractor during the original inquiry. According to her, the audio was captured covertly by a volunteer posing as a groundskeeper at Tamsley Manor during an unannounced inspection. The content of the tape was never officially released, but it was reviewed by a forensic acoustic specialist, Dr. Louis Anwar, under NDA in 2010. His notes were later leaked in a whistleblower blog in 2012. This is what he wrote. The recording begins in near silence, punctuated by the soft shuffle of what seems to be a rhythmic sway, fabric moving, maybe bare feet on floor. Then, a whisper. Not English, not language, but sound shaped like it, cadenced, hypnotic. A pause. Then, every child in the room joins in. 18 voices, same cadence, no error, total synchronization. The hair on my neck stood up. It wasn't what they were saying, it's that they were saying it together, rehearsed, practiced. Like prayer, but wrong, like prayer said backwards. Then came the sound I cannot forget. A knock, not from inside the room, from beneath it, 3 times. Then everything goes silent, not one breath, as if they all knew it was listening. Anwar stopped working in the field shortly after. The leaked audio, never authenticated, spread across the internet, analyzed by amateur sleuths, paranormal investigators, linguists, and folklorists. Most dismissed it as a hoax, but there were enough peculiarities in the tape to stir curiosity. By 2014, the Ashfern case had become legend. A popular podcast, Hollow Tongue, ran a 3-part expose called The Sisters Who Taught Silence, blending fact with speculation. Viewers of the series began to investigate public records, and in doing so, unearthed a small but disturbing pattern. The year after the quiet home was raided, 1983, 6 new private child care facilities opened within 50 miles of Ashfern. All were licensed under different names, by different parties. But one pattern stood out. Every founder had once been employed at St. Edda's orphanage. The most infamous of these new homes was Marrow Housey, located on the outskirts of Scandalby. It operated from 1983 to 1990 and was shuttered after a fire destroyed its east wing. No lives were lost, but photographs taken during the investigation revealed a chilling detail. Painted above the exit door of the burned-out wing were the words, "Speak, and we invite them." That sentence had also appeared in one of the Tamsley Manor journals. Authorities at the time dismissed it as coincidence, but families of former residents disagreed. Several children placed in Marrow House between 85 and 89 were later treated for extreme mutism, night terrors, and self-inflicted mouth injuries. One survivor, identified only as Case 042, in court records, claimed that she remembered hearing a voice from the wall at night, not a ghost, but someone behind the plaster, asking if she wanted to be free. She told me to say her name. I didn't. I never did. Asked what the name was, the girl drew a shape instead, a mouth with 2 vertical lines through it, the same symbol. Again. In 2016, the UK's independent inquiry into child sexual abuse (ICSA) included a brief mention of the quiet home in its broader investigation into failures of oversight in the 1970s and 80s. Most of the findings were redacted, but one public conclusion sent chills through those who remembered the story. The failure to investigate ritualistic abuse allegations beyond a psychological framework may have allowed generational practices to evolve unnoticed, often masked by clinical diagnosis. This was the first and only time the word ritualistic had appeared in official context regarding the quiet home. It lent renewed credibility to those who had spent decades trying to prove that what happened at Tamsley Manor wasn't just abuse, it was a system. And it wasn't isolated. In 2019, a final piece of evidence emerged, unexpectedly. A demolition crew clearing a secondary lot near the original quiet home grounds uncovered a buried safe beneath a collapsed drainage tunnel. Inside were 2 reels of Super 8 film and a stack of notebooks, all marked with the initials M.E. Martha Elwood. The footage was recovered, digitized, and handed to archival specialists. What it showed confirmed the worst. The reels depicted a classroom, empty but prepared. Small wooden desks, a blackboard with a phrase chalked repeatedly, "Listen, don't speak. Listen and they'll pass you by." The camera then panned slowly toward a desk at the front. On it a doll, handmade, stitched lips, button eyes. Martha enters the frame and sits before the desk. She faces the camera directly and speaks, first in English, then in the same cadence described in the covered audio recording. She repeats a sound over and over, shelth, else, shelth, os, sheltha. After the 7th repetition, a sound is heard in the film, distant, hollow, low, like something dropped into a well. Martha pauses. She smiles. Then she whispers she's still here. The footage ends with static. The ICS sealed the contents and added it to their classified archive. No further public statements were made. Today, nothing grows properly on the field where Tamsley Manor once stood. Crops rot early. Birds avoid nesting there. A child went missing near the fence line in 2021, found unharmed, standing in place, facing the empty field, lips moving silently. He couldn't explain what he'd been doing. When asked what he remembered, he said only this: "She told me to be quiet, or she'd find the others too." The boy could not say who she was, But when shown a lineup of photos, faces from the Elwood trial from orphanage files, he pointed, without hesitation, to a faded image of Martha Elwood as a child. That one. But she had no mouth. There is a file, locked in the Department of Health's restricted archive labeled Ashfern in 1982, Female. The file's contents have never been publicly released, but whistleblower correspondence from 2023 revealed one final chilling detail that has never before been part of the public discourse. Within that file is a drawing. It was recovered not from the Elwood home, but from a child's psychiatric record in Newcastle, dated 1984. The child had no known connection to Ashfern or the quiet home. She had never lived in Lincolnshire, and her parents were living together unharmed in a modest suburban estate. But after a series of night terrors, the girl, age 9, began writing in a strange script during sleep. The language matched precisely the fragments found in the journals at Tamsley Manor. And her drawing, a simple room circular, with no windows and a black cloth hung on the wall. In the center, children standing still, facing away. On the back of the paper, written in large, childlike letters, "We don't talk. We're waiting." Ashfern today is a quiet village still. The war memorial where Fiona Croy reappeared is mossed over. The names of the dead faded. The listening field remains untouched, fenced off not by law but by superstition. The villagers, when asked, will tell you nothing. The new generation has no memory of it, and the older ones choose not to remember. But trauma, like sound, does not vanish. It echoes. Several survivors from the quiet home are still believed to be alive. Their names changed, their records sealed, their lives reconstructed through legal anonymity. But now and then pieces surface. In 2022, a nurse working in a psychiatric home in northern Wales reported a patient who refused to speak, but hummed compulsively at night. The melody matched a harmonic pattern described in the Ashfern files. When shown an array of random symbols, the patient pointed at the double-slashed mouth and began to cry. The case was closed without follow-up, no confirmation, no investigation, because there is still fear, even in official circles, that to speak of the quiet home too much is to open a door. And doors, once opened, invite whatever listens. There are several ongoing theories about the true nature of the events in Ashfern. The psychological explanation, trauma-induced mutism, control through silence, the reinforcement of behavioral cycles in closed systems, remains the official stance of the medical and legal communities. But for those who were there, for those who saw, another story remains. It is whispered in support groups, in locked forums, in folded notes slipped under doors, a belief that the Elwood sisters were not the architects, but the disciples, that they were continuing something old, passed down through generations of care homes, orphanages, and religious houses, that the ritual of the second silence wasn't a fabrication of madness, but a binding, a preventative, a sacrifice made not for power, but for survival. They made us quiet, Judith Elwood once said, because it was the only way to stop them from answering back. Fiona Croy never spoke again. She lived the remainder of her life in institutional care, eventually passing away in 2007 from complications due to severe catatonia. In her final years, she developed a habit, tearing the corners of bedsheets into narrow strips, folding them, and placing them under her pillow. When asked why she did it, her only reaction was to stare at the nearest shadowed corner of the room, wide-eyed. A psychiatrist, Dr. Nina Farrow, noted in her final report, she seemed to be waiting, not with fear, but with discipline, like a soldier at post. Among Fiona's belongings, one item stood out, a torn fragment of fabric, stained and worn, embroidered with a name, Hattie Wren, with the unidentified child, the forgotten one, the final name in the circle. In the decades since the case was buried, there has been no formal apology from the Department of Health, nor any legal recompense to those who survived. But behind closed doors, policies have shifted. Private children's homes are now required to submit quarterly video evidence of classroom activity. The practice of non-verbal discipline is banned in all UK care facilities, and a digital archive of missing children's voices, recordings taken before their disappearances, is maintained by the Missing Persons Bureau in a protected database labeled Project Whisper. It was created not just for tracking, but for comparison. A strange pattern had emerged. The last known audio of certain children, their cries, their final words, often contained one inexplicable sound layered beneath the primary frequency, a hum subharmonic, like breath exhaled between clenched teeth. In one instance, a forensic sound engineer played the slowed version of such an audio file. At precisely the 14-second mark, a whisper could be heard. 3 words, not from the child, not from anyone in the room, a voice that did not belong. We still listen. Some stories don't end. Some stories wait, buried beneath houses no longer standing, behind doors no longer visible, in the mouths of children who never learned to speak again. The quiet home may be gone, but its echo remains, and sometimes, if you're very still, very quiet, you can feel it watching, waiting for the silence, waiting to return.